Greetings, my friends. This this little introduction to Johnson's Creation and the Cross will function, of course, in the place of our meeting today, Tuesday, with Thursday being part of fall break. So I won't see you for a week, and hopefully by then all of our concerns about COVID will be, well in the rear view mirror. I'll say that Elizabeth Johnson has been one of my very favorite theologians for decades. Among living theologians, she's definitely in my top 5 or 6, I think, and I have a lot of admiration for her work. And I'm excited about doing this book with you, where she's doing a very interesting thing of, starting with St. Anselm, 11th century theologian and philosopher, very well known, of course. And as we read this book, if you're not aware of his atonement ideas, obviously that's what she's really focusing on. And then sort of using his theory as a springboard for raising new questions about how the redemptive love of God is at work in the world, not just for the sake of human beings, which of course was what Anselm was concerned about, over one millennium ago, but for all of creation. And she's actually done quite a bit of work in the last couple decades, Johnson has, on what we might call eco-theology. She has some really, really good stuff. So I hope I won't say anything that I won't cover any of Allie's material. I'd failed to write in my notes that she did volunteer to present today, and so she will do that on Tuesday as well as, and then we'll also try to do your assigned reading for Tuesday as well, next Tuesday. So on page 1, I'm just going to, a couple things, even though I think highly of Johnson, that doesn't mean that she can't come in for some correction now and then. This first thing isn't a correction, but actually in the introduction, very first page, we've talked about this in class. And it would be fun to get her response to this, and maybe she wouldn't make much of it, but she is doing a lot with Romans 8, I think throughout this book, especially the image of creation groaning, of which we have spoken. And in that first paragraph, this would be page number Roman numeral 11, introduction. At the end of that paragraph, she quotes, the children of God are groaning while waiting in hope for the redemption of their bodies. And you might recall that I mentioned in class that in the Greek, Paul doesn't use the plural there. It's the redemption of our. The our is plural, first person plural possessive, our. But it's our body, singular. Obviously, we can't know for sure whether that grammatical detail was important or intended by Paul. But I tend, because I think that he does make those shifts between singular and plural at times that we overlook. And I'm going to go with the idea that he's very intentional about this, that it's the redemption of our body, singular, and especially since he's talking about the redemption of creation and creation's longing for a redemption. It seems quite possible, at least, that it's the singular body, we might say, of the created matrix in which we participate as, humans among many other creatures. Anyway, it's at least worth noting that it's the redemption of our singular body, and it'd be fun to know whether, Johnson has ever encountered that or what she might make of it. If we move on to book 1, very first page, so this is now page 1 in Arabic numbers. Book 1, Wrestling with Anselm. she talks about, she gets into Anselm pretty quickly. One of the classical descriptions, she says, this is where Elizabeth takes up. One of the classical descriptions of theology is faith seeking understanding. By the way, there's actually a really good theological text by that title by a retired Presbyterian theologian named Daniel Migliore. So the phrase, and in the Latin it's fides quaerens intellectum, it's a very well-known phrase, an idea in theology. Johnson goes on, this is a never-ending task, that is, faith seeking understanding, basically, will say of itself. So the first meaning of faith seeking understanding is, as a person of faith, I long to understand the faith that I hold and that holds me and that has grasped my life. But it's also faith seeking understanding of everything, right? It's not just of itself, but like the longing to understand. So she says this is a never-ending task, for as cultures change, new questions arise, making fresh understandings necessary, lest faith be discarded like some outdated fashion. The phrase faith-seeking understanding was crafted by an early medieval theologian named Anselm. Now, that surprised me that she would say that, because actually, whether the exact phrase faith-seeking understanding, that phrase might have been crafted, as she says it was, by Anselm. But Anselm's definitely getting the idea from St. Augustine, who lived about 700 years earlier. And I wouldn't be surprised if you couldn't find Augustine actually using the phrase also, and much earlier. The point here is that Anselm, as he understood the task of theology, it's like you start with some measure of faith. You can't be standing outside the circle of faith, or the circle, we might say, of a Christian community, and try to do theology from the outside. Now, of course you can, but I think the idea would be that Christian theology is truly pursued from within a perspective of faith, even if the faith is small, even if the faith is unsure. Of course, the whole point of faith is that there is some degree of uncertainty. Otherwise, there would be no need or meaning to faith. But Augustine, again, my point would be that Augustine came up with this idea, and he was drawing from a verse in the book of Isaiah that probably he and Anselm both really kind of misunderstood. I'm not sure, but there's somewhere in Isaiah where the Latin translation said, unless you believe, you will not understand. So the same kind of idea, like that in order to understand, one must believe. In order to understand certain matters of the faith, one must begin with some measure of faith. Well, I don't want to beat that horse, to death. Might be too late. So I'm going to move on. There's interesting stuff here. And I love the dialogical way that she set this up. Again, patterning it after Anselm and a guy that I've often thought was very aptly named Bozo. I mean, I know it's Boso, but he's kind of a bozo. Yeah, he asks some good questions, but most of the time, and remember that Anselm's writing both parts, right? Anselm, the teacher, and then Bozo, his student. And most of the time, Bozo says things like, oh, I hadn't considered that before. You are truly great and wonderful, oh Anselm. Or, what a genius. Maybe not quite like that, but it's sort of like, come on. But so we have this dialogical approach. And I think that for the most part, I think that there's some real important stuff here about sort of the historical context for what's called the satisfaction theory of the atonement. That's Anselm's theory. This is really quite good. on page 10, the first time Elizabeth speaks on page 10, like every other human being, Jesus owed obedience to God. This is, Anselm says, what we owe to God is, and I quote now, the willing obedience of our lives. His every thought, word, and deed had to be in accord with divine will and pleasure. Therefore, if he had just lived a life of good, perfect goodness, this would not have made satisfaction for human sin, because that's what everybody owes. There would have been nothing extra to pay back for offense against divine honor. Now, I'm not going to go up against Johnson and say that she's wrong here, but I think there's another stream within Anselm that is often overlooked. And I'm going to share that with you in a minute, but man, you go through here and the flight of the satisfaction theory through history. During the Protestant era, it does become a punishment satisfaction. For Anselm, this was not about Jesus taking our punishment. It was about Jesus assuming our debt or discharging our debt that we owe to God. But the idea of taking punishment that has to be meted out to somebody, this is called the punishment or penal satisfaction theory. And she brings that in for some really good critique. And a lot of what she does here is rehearse some of the recent critiques of Anselm's theory. I think they're nice use of James Cone. Some of you have probably read not No Handle on the Cross, not The Cross and the Switchblade, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, is that what it's called? By James Cone. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more. Have I said anything yet? I'm sure I've said something.